Welcome back to Steel City Sports. So in today's video, I'm going to be reacting to the Pittsburgh Steelers 2024 opponents. So we're obviously waiting for the proper schedule, but at least we now know who the Steelers are going to be playing in this upcoming season. So it's going to be my first look at our opponents. We're going to talk about the Steelers. We're going to talk about these other teams. And let me know down in the comments if there's any other teams in the NFL that you'd like to see me do this for. You know, I'm obviously doing it for my team, but I wouldn't mind talking about other teams' opponents as well. So let's just get into it with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So obviously, we're going to play our division rivals. Obviously, that's a given. So we do have the Ravens, the Bengals, the Browns here. And I think, obviously, with any team, the conventional wisdom with division matchups is usually just to give it the benefit of the doubt and say each team's going to win one of the games. Now, last year, we did beat the Bengals both times. The Burrow injury obviously significantly helped with that. The Browns, we beat early on in the year with Deshaun. I believe that was either week 2 or week 3 on Monday Night Football. We won that game, and then later on in the year, we lost to the Browns in Cleveland. And then the Ravens, we swept the Ravens last year. We beat them with that, the George Pickens bomb that ended. And then the final game of the year, obviously Baltimore was resting all their guys. But we did beat up on our division last year, which is kind of fascinating because the AFC North is widely regarded as the best division in the NFL. And we had the best in-division record of that division. So that's kind of an interesting thought. Will it be the same this upcoming year? No, I don't think so. We're definitely not going to sweep Baltimore again. The only reason we swept them is because, like I said, they were resting all their starters in that final game. Maybe if it plays out the schedule like that again, that has happened a lot with the Steelers' schedule as we end up playing Baltimore the final week of the regular season. So maybe if that plays out like that, but if Baltimore was 100% playing all their guys in that final game, they would have completely obliterated us because we barely squeaked by in that game, and we needed to win that for playoff implications as well. So Baltimore, as long as their guys are playing, the Steelers have absolutely zero business beating the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens last year were the 1 seed, had the reigning MVP Lamar Jackson, got all the way to the AFC title game. So you have basically that same exact roster. I know that they lost Patrick Queen, and we're going to talk about that. But the addition of Derrick Henry completely changes the Baltimore Ravens, in my opinion. Even if you want to say Derrick Henry has lost a step, he's never played with a quarterback the caliber of Lamar Jackson. His prime years were spent with Ryan Tannehill, who as a passer is a very predictable type of passer. He doesn't provide anywhere near the explosiveness that Lamar has. Ryan Tannehill's a stand up straight in the pocket, deliver the ball to the playmakers. Lamar Jackson is one of the biggest physical anomalies we've ever seen in the NFL. So to pair him with that guy, even if Derrick Henry has lost a step physically, which I don't even think is that noticeable because he still rushed for over 1,200 yards last year on a putrid Titans team with the worst offensive line he's ever had. You put that Derrick Henry with this quarterback, with the weapons they now have on that team, with this offensive line, that is going to be a disgusting combination. And for me, as someone who's a massive Derrick Henry fan, he's been one of my favorite players in the NFL for years now, the fact that I'm a Steelers fan, it kind of breaks my heart. It did break my heart whenever he went to the Ravens because now he's on my team's biggest rival. But that's not going to change the fact that he's one of my favorites. I'm still going to root for Derrick Henry individually because he's a monster. And just from removing my Steelers fandom, just looking at it objectively, Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson might be one of the most fun duos to ever witness in the NFL. With Derrick Henry just fucking trucking people, destroying people still, and Lamar Jackson's dual threat ability to carve you up and rush. It's going to be scary for the league. And I think, honestly, on paper, this is the Ravens' year. This ultimately should be the year the Ravens get it done because that addition of Derrick Henry, I think, is so powerful. So, it's hard to say the Ravens are the Super Bowl favorite just because we've seen year in and year out the Chiefs dominate the NFL, especially the AFC. But Just from a pure roster standpoint, a pure on-paper standpoint, the Baltimore Ravens should win the Super Bowl this year. I do believe they have that caliber of a team. So I do see them, as long as they're at full strength, as long as there's no scenario where they're like resting their guys at the end of the year, they're probably going to sweep us, because I like the Steelers, as we're going to get to more of in this video. I really like the Steelers roster as a whole, but in terms of the high-end talent, especially on offense, we cannot compete with the Baltimore Ravens. They're always close physical games when we match up, but I just think that Derrick Henry addition completely changes the Ravens. As for the Bengals matchup, they're a little bit more in a weird situation because obviously Joe Burrow coming off another injury. It's kind of hard for me to really give a realistic expectation for the Bengals, because I went into last year. If you were listening to me last year, the Cincinnati Bengals were my favorite last year. We did a power rankings right before the season started, and I had the Cincinnati Bengals at number 1 on that list, and they completely flat out disappointed me. Even before Joe Burrow got injured, they got off to a terrible start. They got bludgeoned by the Browns in week 1, and it was just weird for the rest of the season. They had one real standout performance last year where they beat the 49ers. I believe that was in San Francisco as well. And it looked like they were starting to get things back on track, but then you have that Thursday night football game where Joe Burrow got hurt against the Ravens. And they were still competitive with Jake Browning, but obviously didn't really stand a real chance as a contending team. So now going into this year, you have the fact that Burrow is injury prone, but even on top of that, we're starting to see some cracks in the foundation of the locker room, because T. Higgins, pretty clear he doesn't want to be there. I think he's requested a trade like twice now, and, that's been one of the biggest stories of the offseason is what's going to happen with T. Higgins. You obviously lost Joe Mixon, who's been the model of consistency for the Bengals for years now. They've been there. He's been obviously the clear number 1 reliable guy at that position. He's gone now. You brought in Zach Moss from the Colts, who is a good player. He's not a great player. I don't think you're going to be able to recreate the production that Joe Mixon brought to the table. And then your best defensive player, Trey Hendrickson, also requested a trade. So I don't know what the hell's going on with the Bengals in terms of their chemistry and their locker room issues. But I'm just going to say, in terms of a talent standpoint, the Cincinnati Bengals I still think that they have that Super Bowl window open, just for the fact that I think outside of Kelsey and Mahomes, the connection of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase is the best duo in the NFL when they're both fully healthy. Look at what they did against the Cardinals. I know it was the Cardinals, but still, it's an NFL team. Look at what those two did against the Cardinals this year alone. And even Jamar Chase kind of proved, because one thing that follows great receivers is well, can they do it without their great quarterback? That was kind of something that was talked about with Devontae Adams, especially when he went to the Raiders. It was like, yeah, he was great with Aaron Rodgers, but let's see if he can do it. And he obviously has done it with mediocre people in Las Vegas. It's kind of the same thing that Jamar proved this past year. Yeah, you're great with Joe Burrow, but what can you do with Jake Browning? And he didn't miss a beat. He was incredible, just as good with Jake Browning. So I think he really proved himself as one of the best. He was already regarded as that, but I think it's just even more impressive now that he's shown he doesn't need a franchise guy to ball out. So I think they still have the talent to be a contending team. In terms of their matchups with the Steelers, I don't view it as big of a gap in terms of I did with the Ravens, just because their offense is really potent, but from a week-in, week-out basis, it's not like a really consistent thing with the Bengals. Just pointing to last year, them getting off to that really slow start, and their defense is not what it was in that Super Bowl run. Like, they've lost guys, particularly in that secondary. So I'm just gonna say, all that rambling to be said that I'm gonna take that. I think they're gonna split. Honestly, I think they're gonna split it. And I talked about this last year because the Bengals always in the Joe Burrow era, they always get off to a slow start. So it really depends on the schedule, I think, because last season we played the Bengals both times in the latter half of the year, and that's why I said they're going to sweep us, because come the later half of the year, that's when the Bengals are red hot. They look their best. Well, obviously that didn't end up mattering because Burrow was injured, but going into next year, I'm hoping that we play the Bengals earlier in the year because they always do get off to that slow start. So now we can look at the Cleveland Browns, and I think the Browns are on a short list of maybe 3 teams of the hardest teams to predict in the NFL from a year-in, year-out basis, because the quarterback position is one of the most bizarre in the entire league. And going all the way back before last year, I made a video talking about the top 5 most intriguing teams. They were number 1 on that list because, and I still think that kind of holds true right now. You know, it's basically the same team. It's like they really, people don't really understand how fucking bizarre the 2023 Cleveland Browns were. The fact that they had 5 different starting quarterbacks and were still able to win 11 games. That is really impressive, of course, but it's not a repeatable recipe. Like, you can't just have that much turnover at the most important position and expect to be a perennial playoff team. So that's why I think the Browns have been such a weird team in terms of, like, some years they're good, some years they're bad. Like, that's kind of the MO with Stefanski. He's been there. He's been in Cleveland for 4 years now. 2 of those years, they made the playoffs, and he won Coach of the Year both those years. But the other 2 years, they were bad and obviously missed the playoffs. So I don't know. I mean, the history tells you this is going to be an off year for the Browns. If they're every other year they're bad, this would be probably an off year. And I think that the writing's kind of on the wall, because I think at this point, it's now like delusional to think that Deshaun Watson is ever going to be at the level they paid him to be, because it's been 4 seasons now. The last time we saw prime, like, incredible superstar, top 5 level guy, Deshaun, that was 2020. That was 4 goddamn seasons ago. That was so long ago. To think that he's ever going to get back to that level, I think is just completely naive. He had 1 good half in a Cleveland Browns uniform and then got injured. So I think when you have to rely on that guy, and your defense is incredible, of course. They had the number 1 defense in the NFL last year. They got the Defensive Player of the Year. They had the number 1 rated pass defense. Like, their defense is killer. But ultimately, like I said, the turnover at the quarterback position, that's just not sustainable, I don't think. So whenever you look at the Steelers matchups, again, I really think it comes down to what time of year are we playing them in the schedule. I'd like to play them probably later in the schedule more than anything, because it's kind of an inevitability that Deshaun's going to get hurt. I mean, honestly, I'm not trying to be an asshole or anything, but look at his track record. Like, the guy is now completely injury prone. Whether he's just playing that up because he don't give a shit, he's like, I got all this money in the bank. If I get this ticky-tack injury, why the hell am I pushing myself? I got the guaranteed money. And as we've learned, he's one of the lowest like class guys in the NFL. Like, he's just a scumbag. And I hate to say that, because I loved Deshaun Watson at Clemson. His first couple years in the league, he was legit one of my favorite players in the NFL. Like, I wanted his jersey. I really, really liked Deshaun, and then all the bullshit came out. And now I think it's clear. You even take all the allegations, take that stuff off the table. There's really a question of, does he really even give a fuck about football? That's a legit thing you have to talk about with Deshaun, because the amount of games he's played over the last 3 years is literally, it's laughable. So I don't know what the Browns, like I said, I think they are legitimately one of the most difficult teams in the NFL to predict. And if we're going to sweep any of our in-division rivals, I would say it's the Browns, because although they have that stellar defense, I think they have the biggest potential to just blow up in terms of being terrible, like, because Deshaun is so wildly inconsistent, you know, more bad than good as a Brown in terms of his play, and B, there's no guarantee Deshaun's going to play the entire year. So that means what? Another full year of Dorian Thompson-Robinson? You know, there's no Joe Flacco sitting out there now. So Dorian Thompson-Robinson, like, I don't know. So the Browns, I'm going to say the most likely scenario is the Steelers are going to sweep the Browns. I think if they're going to sweep any of the in-division rivals, it will be them. So that does it for the division rivals. Now we can take a look at some of the other matchups. So the Chiefs, we don't need to spend much time on that. The Pittsburgh Steelers have no business beating the Chiefs. It's I would put it at like a 2% chance of the Steelers beating the Chiefs. You know, I'm trying to think just in recent memory of when the last time we played the Chiefs was. and I could be wrong on this. If you know for sure, correct me down in the comments, but I'm pretty sure the last time we played the Kansas City Chiefs was Big Ben's final game in the NFL, that last playoff game for the 2021 season, where the first half was competitive, and then the second half, they just completely fucking obliterated us. And I know it's a different team now. Like, they still had Tyreek back then. Obviously we had Big Ben, but in terms of the talent matchup, the Kansas City Chiefs have such an advantage, basically at almost every facet of a football team. It would be probably like, it'd be competitive to start off, I think, but as the game goes on, I don't think we could hang with the Chiefs. I think they're going to pummel us, I think. And this goes into another thing that we're going to see as this video goes on is, we play two of the toughest divisions outside of our own division, which is regarded as the best division. We play two other really tough divisions in terms of the AFC West, which has the reigning champs, and then the NFC East, which produced not long ago, 3 playoff teams. Not this past year, but the year before, they had 3 teams in the playoffs with the Giants, the Eagles, and the Cowboys. The Chiefs, I think they're going to destroy us. The Chargers, that's an interesting matchup. That's one I'm actually really excited to see, because in terms of style, the Steelers and Chargers are kind of a similar team in terms of what they prioritize, We know Harbaugh prioritizes in the trenches, running the ball, stuff like that. Well, that's kind of what the Steelers, at least with their offseason moves, it looks like that's what the Steelers are going to be prioritizing for next season. They went heavy in the draft with drafting offensive linemen. We have a really good 1-2 punch at the running back position. So I'm interested. I think this could be like a really old school type of matchup, just like beat the shit out of each other in the trenches. I think that's going to be a fun matchup. It's going to be low scoring, I think. But ultimately, I do think we have the player for player talent. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers have a slight advantage. The only argument you could say, I think, is Justin Herbert just has an insane game, which is definitely possible. Justin Herbert has proven that he doesn't need elite receivers to look as good as he has. There was a stretch in multiple times throughout his career where Keenan Allen was hurt, Mike Williams was hurt, and he had to rely on guys like Palmer and unknown guys. So, yeah, it is worrisome that they got rid of his weapons, but they did also draft him, Ladd McConkey, and he doesn't need the stud. He doesn't need the studs, the superstars, to thrive at receiver. I feel like he could grab you and me at receiver and be fine. So, like I said, it's really a coin toss, that matchup. I want to lean more towards my Steelers, but you could really argue me over just by saying Herbert's going to have a Herbert game, which is very possible. Next is the Dallas Cowboys. This is something we kind of talked about in earlier videos. I think the Dallas Cowboys are going to take a step back this year. I think that they did get worse this offseason. They lost their best secondary player. In my opinion, Stephon Gilmore was the identity of that secondary this past year. You can talk about DaRon Bland all you want, but in terms of like one-on-one lockdown, DaRon Bland gets burned a lot. And it's weird now that they're going to have him and Diggs, who are basically a carbon copy of each other in terms of their play styles, in terms of they're not really great at man-to-man shutdown. They're really good at the flashy plays, like they're playmakers. But that worries me a lot. Losing Stephon Gilmore and just having two guys that are not great in straight-on man-to-man coverage, that worries me for them. Tony Pollard, say what you will. Tony Pollard had a very disappointing year as running back one. I was a big Pollard supporter for years. They finally gave him the opportunity to be the clear number one guy, and he kind of disappointed. Not to say that he was bad. He still had a little over 1,000 yards, but we were kind of expecting like a 1,500 yard type season from Tony Pollard, and he just did not deliver that whatsoever. But even though he did disappoint, you still massively downgraded at the running back position and bringing back Ezekiel Elliott, which, yeah, if you're a Cowboys fan, it's going to be cool to see him play at the beginning of the year, but he's coming off his worst year as a pro in New England. He was not good at all. This is probably the worst offensive line that Dak Prescott has ever played behind, and when you look at Dak Prescott's win-loss record when he doesn't have, over 100 yards rushing support, he wins like 30% of his games, and I think that that's going to be the case this year because, like I said, they downgraded from running back, and it's the worst offensive line. And The wide receiver position, I think, is extremely thin. I thought that was something that they were going to prioritize in the draft, is drafting a new receiver to throw into this offense, because really it's CeeDee Lamb and who else? Like, I like Brandon Cooks, but he's really getting up there with age, and outside of them, it gets really thin. Michael Gallup's gone. I think he's with the Raiders now. So, you're one CeeDee Lamb twisted ankle away from what the hell is this offense? And I already had my problems with Dak last year. Dak was probably the guy that we criticized the most on this channel. And I think for good reason. He showed that in the playoff game that he's not an MVP guy. He's not. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to get off into a Dak tangent right now. But you had that team last year, and I already had issues with that Cowboys team, and now you have a less talented version of that Cowboys team. Give me the Steelers in that matchup, especially being at home. I'm rolling with the Steelers in that matchup. Next is the Giants. Excuse me. We don't need to spend much time on the Giants because I think that they're legitimately going to be in contention for the worst team in the NFL next year. I think it's honestly going to be that bad. I think the only really positive argument you can use to say the Giants are going to do anything productive is, and I've heard a couple people make this argument, I don't know if I buy into it, is that Daniel Jones has never played with a number one receiver in his entire career. He's always kind of had a lackluster receiving core, which is true, but he's got no excuse now that he has Malik Neighbors, who some people think is even better than MHJ. Some people think he actually is wide receiver one from this class. Was an absolute freak, a production machine at LSU, and has the some of the highest upside of any prospect in this class. So you got that guy now. So there's no excuse of your receiver class, your receiver room sucks. You got a guy now, a certified guy. But that's probably the most optimistic viewpoint with the Giants, is just saying Malik Neighbors is going to be your savior. Sorry. But, wide receiver can't save a franchise, especially one as flawed as the New York Giants with all the problems they have. With Daniel Jones, I think you can argue is on the worst contract in the NFL. They won, 6 games last year, and you took their really only productive offensive player away in Saquon. He's with the Eagles now, obviously. So they won 6 games last year with Saquon. You take Saquon away, they could win 3 games next year. I really think they're going to be that bad, and it sucks because I thought Brian Daboll was on a trajectory of to be one of the best coaches in the league, just based off his rookie year. That was kind of the conventional wisdom. But now there's weird stuff in terms of the locker room. The defense is going to be awesome. I really love the defense they're putting together, but the offense is that bad that it can drag them down to where I think they can have easily the worst offense in the NFL next year and arguably the worst record next year. They're going to be that bad, I think. So the Steelers should pretty easily beat the Giants. And speaking of New York, we have the Jets as well. The Jets are another team that I have a list of issues with. And I was even doubting the Jets last year, and that was before Aaron Rodgers' gruesome injury. Now you take Aaron off another debilitating injury. He's basically, I think all of his athleticism is probably going to be gone. He's just going to be a straight-up stand-in-the-pocket type quarterback, plus his age. And you look at some of the other guys that they're going to be really relying upon on this team. The tackles that they brought in to band-aid their offensive line, they're old, and especially Tyron Smith is banged up a lot. That's been the biggest thing with Tyron Smith over the past 5 years. The guy just can't stay on the field. Mike Williams, they brought in to be their clear number 2 receiver. He's another injury-plagued guy. Breece Hall, I like a lot. Had a disgusting, gruesome injury in his rookie year, and then Aaron Rodgers, like we just said, is coming off an Achilles at 40 years old. So all of that leads me to believe, I just think there's a lot working against the Jets. I really, again, similar to the Giants, I really like their defense, but there's just too many question marks on the offensive side of the ball for me to really have real expectation for the Jets. And like I said, I was having trouble even last year thinking they were going to be a playoff team. I think I predicted them to win 8 or 9 games last year, and that was with a fully healthy Aaron. You have to even look at Aaron's last year in Green Bay. He was not good. He had a clear, steep decline his last year in Green Bay, and you can talk about his lack of weapons. Well, look what Jordan Love just did this past year with those same exact weapons. So I don't know. I just don't know what the Jets. I think the Steelers should beat them. I think we have a more consistent team, a better overall roster. And I just don't know what to expect from the Jets. I think they could really quickly blow up. Now let's take a look at the away teams. Obviously, we already talked about the in-division teams, so let's go to the Raiders. And this is a little weird just in terms of the scheduling matchup because we played the Raiders in Vegas last year. So I don't know how common that is to play an out-of-division team back-to-back years in the same stadium, because last year we did play the Raiders. I want to say that was like week 3 or week 4. It was really early in the schedule last year. We beat up on the Raiders. Davante Adams had his best game of the year playing against us in our washed corners of Pat Peterson and Levi Wallace, who are both, thank God, off the team now. But I remember Davante had his best game of the season last year against us in Vegas, and now we're going back there to play them. Just kind of weird by the matchup. But I think the Raiders, they're a feisty team. I think they're going to be a lot better than they were last year. They might not win many more games, but they're going to be a lot more competitive. Pierce, I think, is a significant upgrade over the guy that they previously had, and Josh McDaniels, or McDaniel. I can never get that right. Is it McDaniels or McDaniel? I don't fucking know. But either way, Antonio Pierce is 1,000 times better. You know, you look at what he did instantly coming in with the Raiders last year and changed the culture of the team, kind of embraced the identity of the Raiders. So I like the Raiders. Like, they have a good team. They have high-end talent. They have Crosby. They got Adams. It sucks that they lost Josh Jacobs, but they also did bring in Brock Bowers. So they got weapons on this team. Gardner Minshew, now their quarterback. Obviously, I kind of wanted them to draft the quarterback. I had Penix going there in my mock draft. Obviously, that wasn't available for them because Atlanta took him. But Gardner Minshew is going to be interesting because he had his best year this past year with the Colts. He was one throw out of getting them into the playoffs, where they had no business being that good last year. But Shane Steichen, look at what Shane Steichen did for Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts went from runner-up of MVP to now. You have a lot of people realistically questioning if Jalen Hurts is like the future of the Eagles. I think that's asinine. I still have big-time faith in Jalen Hurts because I've seen him make the big plays. But there is a real thing that happens whenever a player goes from playing under Steichen to going to not playing under him. And Gardner Minshew, I think, was highly elevated by Shane Steichen. I just don't think that's going to be very he's not going to be anywhere near as productive with the Raiders, even though they have the talent. So I think the Steelers, again, I think they should beat up on the Raiders. I really do. Next is the Broncos, another team we don't have to spend much time on because I don't think they're going to be very good. They should beat the Broncos, honestly. The Broncos, they're kind of a shit show right now. Like, the Broncos might have one of the worst situations in the entire NFL. It's going to be definitely a game that I'm going to be interested to see if they put this one in primetime, because it's obviously Russell Wilson going back to Denver to play against Sean Payton, the guy who fucking hates his guts. So I think that might be a primetime game just for the fact that it's Russell Wilson going back, trying to get his revenge against Sean Payton for cutting him. And it's going to be funny because the Broncos are going to be paying Russell Wilson in that game to play against the Broncos. So the Steelers, I think, Russ is going to have added motivation to beat up on the Broncos. And from a talent perspective, the Broncos are nowhere near the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Broncos have one of the worst rosters in the NFL right now. Their receiver room, I like, but they need a lot of work. Their line, their defense, I don't know. They let go of Simmons for nothing. I don't like that as well. I just don't know what the Broncos, I don't know what a realistic expectation is for them, because Sean Payton, he proved last year he can coach, but I don't know if that's enough to overcome the deficiencies of the Broncos. I don't know what a fair expectation for Bo Nix is, because if Bo Nix just sucks, there's no wiggle room. There's no silver lining. Bo Nix is what Bo Nix is right now because he had the most starts in college football history. So this isn't a guy where you just sit him for a year and you're like, oh, we'll see what he grows to be. No, he's NFL ready right now. And if he's not NFL ready right now, he's not the guy. And yet you used a very lucrative asset to bring him in, the 12th overall pick. So we're going to see. That's already a lot of pressure on Bo Nix. So I would say the odds are against Bo Nix working out, but, crazier things have happened. But in terms of the matchup, the Steelers should just fucking pummel the Broncos. They have no business competing with us. Next is the Philadelphia Eagles. We get the Battle of PA. which happened, I'm trying to think the last time we played the Eagles, I believe was the year they went to the Super Bowl with Hurts. I was actually in Cleveland when that game happened. I was at a Cavs game, but we stopped at a bar before, watched it on the TV, and I wanted to cry because they fucking kicked our heads in. And I know that the Eagles, they're definitely a different team now. They've lost some guys from retirement, Kelsey and Fletcher Cox, but they've also added Saquon Barkley. And I talked about this before when they added Saquon, is they basically have like a Pro Bowl team on offense now. Like there's absolutely zero excuse for the Eagles to be bad next year. The implosion. Obviously, a lot of things contributed to the Philadelphia Eagles kind of self-imploding this past year, but I think the number one thing came down to the coordinators were not ready. They were overwhelmed. They were kind of able to patch over it the first half of the year, but as the year went on, they became a lot more predictable. A lot of people were able to expose what they were trying to do. So I think that they have significant upgrades to their coordinators, which matters a lot whenever your head coach really doesn't contribute anything, which is why, again, Sirianni's a guy I called to be fired for last year. Not only for the collapse the Eagles had, but also on top of that, what the fuck does Nick Sirianni provide for the Philadelphia Eagles? What does he do outside of being like a glorified cheerleader? He doesn't call the defensive plays. He don't call the offensive plays. He don't make personnel decisions. So what the fuck is Nick Sirianni providing to the Eagles? I don't know. So that's why I thought he should have been fired. But I will give them credit because I think they made significant upgrades at both coordinators, bringing in Kellen Moore and bringing in, what the fuck's his name from Miami? I always forget his name. Vic Fangio. They brought him in. So those are both really good coordinators, both big upgrades. The Eagles, they probably should beat us down again, just like they did back the last time we played. I'm expecting us to lose to the Eagles from a talent perspective. We're nowhere near the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, they are one of the most loaded rosters in the NFL. They should beat up on us. Next is the Commanders. I think they're going to be a fun team. Jaden Daniels, I think, is going to be one of the most electric quarterbacks in the next couple of years here. But obviously, he's a rookie. I think this team is actually going to be better than a lot of people think. I liked some of their veteran signings, Bobby Wagner, Austin Eckler. And they obviously still got Terry. They got someone for Jaden to throw the ball to. So I think they're going to be a fun team. They're going to be a competitive team. I just don't know how good that's going to reflect in their win-loss ratio. This feels like a team that the Steelers would play down to, because every once in a while, this doesn't just go for the Commanders. It goes for whatever team falls in this category. And that category is the Steelers always overlook a team in the regular season. It always happens whenever we get off to a good start. We're looking forward to like a division matchup against the Ravens. And the Commanders feel like a team that we would overlook just because they're kind of in a rebuild. And they just come out and they beat us. And I could see, whether it's Washington or whether it's Denver, Atlanta, one of these random teams to just out of nowhere beat us when we're not expecting it. Like, we would be favored in this matchup, even though it's in Washington, but I feel like one of these games we're going to blow just because we overlooked them. So Washington, I feel like they could be a good threat for that. The Colts, one of the biggest up-in-the-air teams in the entire league, because it all comes down to, can Anthony Richardson play? And the limited sample size we saw him play, I can't remember, it was either 2.5 games or 3.5 games. I want to say it was 3.5 games he played his rookie year. He looked really, really good. He had the poise. He had the athleticism. He had the accuracy. He looked really good in those couple games he played. But very small sample size. We're going to see now, like, this is one of the most important years for the Colts franchise going forward. Because if AR can play, they're going to be a fucking team, because they got the coach right. I liked their draft a lot. If Latu works out, he can be a fucking monster. I think Adonai Mitchell was one of the best picks of the entire second round. A clear position of need was wide receiver for them. So I like the Colts. I think they got a lot of stuff working in their favor. It just comes down to, can AR play? And that's ultimately what's going to decide the Colts' obviously next decade of football, is if this kid can play. I think he can, but we got to see him prove it. I think the Steelers will beat the Colts. Last year we did play the Colts, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life watching that Colts game. Obviously, Trubisky played that game, and I say this every time I talk about Trubisky, but I'm going to continue to say it. He was about as fun to watch as getting your fucking teeth pulled out with a pair of pliers. That's how fun it was to watch Mitch Trubisky play. And that was the worst game of the year for the Steelers offense last year, was that game against the Colts where Mitch Trubisky flat out fucking shit his pants on national television. Legitimately one of the worst games I've ever seen from a professional quarterback was that game last year. But whatever. We're past that now. The only reason the Colts, because we even kind of had a lead for a big part of that game, it's just that second half Trubisky completely fucking, it gets me pissed off just thinking about it right now. But they squeaked by us then. We had Trubisky, so now that we're going to have more stability on the offense, we should be able to beat the Colts. And then the last team here listed is the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons, they're a team to watch for. They could kind of blow up in terms of their locker room with the Penix pick, because Kirk Cousins, coming off a gruesome injury at the age of 35, if he gets banged up again and they throw Penix out there for a game, he starts a game, let's say Kirk Cousins just gets like a little banged, like a twisted ankle or whatever, has to miss a game or two. They throw Penix out there and he looks fucking awesome. Well, now you have instantly a quarterback controversy in Atlanta. So I think they kind of set themselves up for failure. I like Michael Penix. He's one of my favorite prospects. I think I was a lot higher on him than a lot of other people, but still to this day makes absolutely zero sense to draft him whenever you just paid Kirk Cousins all this money. For me, it felt like they just didn't know what the fuck they were doing, because if the plan was to draft Michael Penix, then the decision to pay Kirk Cousins $180 million fully guaranteed makes absolutely zero sense, because Michael Penix is one of the oldest quarterback prospects of the first round. So it's like, you can't really use the rationality of, oh, well, he can sit for a couple years like Jordan Love. Like, no, Michael Penix is, 24 years old? Like, he's not a guy you sit. He has some of the most starts in college football history. This isn't a guy you just sit for a couple of years. Like, if they were to just play Kirk for 3 years, you'd have Michael Penix making his debut as a 27-year-old, which is just not a good recipe. The advantage of having a good first-round quarterback is that they're on that cheap contract. You can build a contending team around. We saw countless teams do this. So I don't want to get too far off on a tangent with Atlanta, because that's kind of a what if Kirk gets hurt or not. But Atlanta feels like a team that would beat the Steelers, because I think that they have potential to have a high-powered offense, and when we play those high-powered offenses, we just simply can't keep up. The way the Steelers win is you kind of like old school beat you up type of football, keep the score close, rely on the defense. Anytime we play the teams that can just hang a lot of points on you really quick, we get exposed, and that kind of was reflected in the playoff game against the Buffalo Bills. We just could not hang with that offense. And Atlanta, on paper at least, should be a very potent offense, and they have an underrated defense as well. So that's been my initial reaction to the Steelers' 2024 opponents. If you made it this far, really appreciate you listening to me ramble. I don't even know how long this video is. It's got to be long, but that's kind of my thoughts. Definitely let me know your opinions down in the comments. If there's any team you want to see me talk about their opponents for, definitely would do that. But thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.